All right, everyone, this is Weeb Shorts here, and I am bringing you a video today on how to play faster without thinking less. So I've been inclined to make this video as I have attended 3 Bushiroad Championship Series tournaments this year, and at each and every round of each and every one of them, I have watched all rounds go into the allotted extra 10 minutes and use all 10 of those minutes. I do not think it should be taking this long to play a game. So I am now here bringing you a video on how to play faster without playing worse. So this way you can avoid going to time and whatnot. So first of all, reasons to play faster even just outside of a tournament setting. So first of all, of course, it avoids going to time in those big events. So going into time is a really scary thing to happen in Weiss, so it's fortunately not as bad as other card games. The time and round rules in this game are a lot more forgiving than they are in other rounds, but you still run the risk of, oh, if I had one more turn, the opponent would have lost the game, or oops, our clocks are tied at 10 minutes, so now we draw, and that's basically like we both lost. So that's a really, really big and probably the biggest reason that you actually want to play faster in any card game, for that matter, is just to avoid going into overtime in a large event. At a local level, this will help your locals run smoother, as you won't be having to, other people won't be having to wait for your game to finish, and then you can just continue on with your tournament. Bit of a small edge here. If you are actively playing faster than your opponent, there are some people that get intimidated by that and will play worse because of it. This is obviously not a huge benefit, but it's a benefit. Going back to a more local level, it's less obnoxious to your opponent if you're not taking forever. I know I have sat across from people that take quite a long time on their turn or for anything in the game, and it's kind of obnoxious. You eventually get used to it, but at the same time, I'd rather not have to be used to it. And for the subject of testing, it lets you play more games in a shorter amount of time. If you are preparing for a large event, testing a deck for a locals, whatever it may be, you can play. If your average game is 20 to 25 minutes instead of 35 to 40, you can jam more games within an hour than if you were taking a long time, which gives you more games to test, therefore better data on whatever you're trying to test for, and it's just more Weiss. And I love more Weiss. I don't know about you, but I do love more Weiss. So I'm first going to divide this all into the macro and micro of what is taking time out of a game. So first of all, the macro are things that happen like once or twice during a game, but they take large chunks of time to occur. Quick bullet points here, just knowing what's worth thinking about and practicing your deck are two very large points in the macro. And the micro of things that take time, these are things that are going to happen repeatedly throughout the course of the entire game, and they're going to use a little bit of time. You probably won't even think about it, but the time that you take will definitely add up. And that's going to be improper sequencing and taking unnecessary game actions for really any part of the game. So moving first in here to the macro. I've got a couple bullet points here. So first point for the macro, know your deck front to back. Don't ever go into a tournament without knowing every word on all of your cards. That goes for regionals, that goes for locals, anything. You should be able to recite every word on your card before you go into a tournament. You should know its game plan and everything it can do, everything it can't do. You should not be having to spend minutes of your time just thinking about, oh hey, can I do this? What can I get off of this much stock? You should know going into the tournament, going into your game, how much stock you need for what effects, for what combo turn. You should know like everything. All of the things that your deck should be able to do, you should know it going into a tournament. That way, you're not the only thing you're having to think of is edge cases. Because if you can more or less autopilot, I'm not saying autopilot through a tournament, not saying autopilot through a game, but there are situations in a game in which you can autopilot because you know the extent of what your deck can and cannot do. It's going to save you a whole lot of time. Extending off of that, solitaire your deck before an event. You might end up seeing things that you didn't know your deck could even do. Interactions that you might have put in there without realizing, or maybe you even forgot about a synergy that you put into your deck. So, solitaring your deck, even just a couple times before an event, will save you a lot of time in an actual match, because you'll have like the flow of what cards need to go where and when. Planning your actions before making any. So this applies to the start of a turn. So when you draw your card, don't be thinking about what your next move is as you take an action. You should draw your card, look at what that card is, and then determine, hey, what am I going to do this turn? And then follow through on all of those actions. So you shouldn't be drawing, do I clock? Okay, I'll clock. Clock, draw 2, see my 2, think, play a card, activate the card's effect if it has one, think, what effect did that have on the game? No, you should know that whenever you play the card, this is going to happen, which means you can do this, this, and this, and this, and this, and then you can end your turn. Everything runs smoothly, and you won't have to take as much time throughout playing of the turn. Tangential to that, think while your opponent is thinking. While your opponent is taking your turn, so Weiss is a rather uninteractive game, all things considered. So while your opponent is thinking about their turn, you should already be thinking about what you're going to do on your next turn. So while they're doing their actions and they're playing a card and thinking about what their card even does and reading their own stuff, you should not be sitting there thinking, oh, why are they taking so long? I wonder what I'm going to get for food after this. Can X2s even make it into top? You should be thinking about what your next turn is. You should be thinking about what they might be doing in their turn, even before they take that action, and how you are going to respond to that turn. That way, whenever you get to your turn, you draw your card, and you determine, what am I going to do for the rest of this turn? It takes much less time to even do that, as you offloaded so much of that time to when your opponent was taking game actions. Moving on down the list here, if you're playing JP, make sure your translation sheets are organized and easily accessible. So in JP, obviously you can't just hand your opponent your card unless they speak Japanese. But you're required to have translation sheets at big tournaments. Locals are a lot more loose with the rules, but making sure those are organized and easily accessible will make it to where if you ever have to reference your own card for whatever reason, which you shouldn't have to do, or your opponent wants to read one, you can easily just hand it to them by just knowing what page number what cards are on. Moving on from this, use fresh sleeves. So if you have the choice between using like $3 Ultra Pro monocolor sleeves or using your favorite waifu sleeves in these really old gummy over sleeves that you've had for the last 6 years, you should probably just go with the Ultra Pros. Shuffling should not take that long. It should not be taking you that long to actually shuffle your deck. And having just these old gunky sticky sleeves are not going to be of any benefit to you. So, best case, if you want to keep using those waifu sleeves, just change your oversleeves every month or so. It'll speed up your shuffling so much more than you actually realize. And speaking of shuffling, get rid of shuffling rituals. And I'm actually going to extend this on to any kind of card movement rituals that you might have. And what I mean by rituals is just things that don't add any amount of benefit to you. So that can be things like shuffling your hand whenever you're trying to take game actions, moving climaxes to the bottom of your waiting room. You might have to think you might have to think about what is and is not actually taking away time, because this is going to depend on what your ritual is and how accustomed you are to it. I know some people put the climaxes to the bottom of their waiting room and they do it in a split second. Doesn't matter at all. But I know some people prefer keeping their climaxes at the bottom of their waiting room before a refresh, and they take actual time to sort them to the bottom as they go into their waiting room. And it takes more time than you think. So moving on from this, we get into the micro of taking time. So first of all, I'm going to say use your time at mulligan effectively. So in this game, you are allowed to go to your post mulligan before the timer even starts. So whenever you're actually at that mulligan step before the timer has began at an event, you should be looking at your hand and what your opponent has mulliganed to determine what your first turn is going to be. You should never be taking more than a couple seconds on your first turn, because you already get so much time before the round just to look at your opening hand. You should always be, all right, I mull this, I drew these, okay, this is what I had, draw, clock, play my card, attack, pass. Done. I should never have to see somebody thinking about what their turn 1 or turn 2 play is, unless something very strange has happened. Moving off of that, we have keep a continuous thought on the board state. Now, this isn't too relevant in this card game as compared to others, as the board state is regularly refreshed to something else. But if your opponent is playing some kind of a board-based deck, or they have some kind of spicy back row, just keep the mental note on that card being there, rather than every time you have to do combat math or anything, you have to recount for the 2k to front that something's giving. It takes very small amounts of time every time that you do combat math. So you're like lining up your opponent's powers. Like if your opponent has a 2-1 that says all of your characters gain 1,000 power, you should in your head just know that every card you look at is going to have 1,000 extra power. You shouldn't be having to count for that extra 1,000 every time you go to check for powers. So keeping verbalizations to a minimum. So this goes for any kind of talking or reaction that you might have. At a local level, yeah, you're going to be chatting with your opponent, just having a good time. You're at locals. At a bigger tournament, you really shouldn't be talking to your opponent unless you have to. Declare your effects and game actions as necessary. Telling your opponent, oh, hey, that's a really cool card. Or like, wow, you're so compressed. Anything like that is going to take time out of the game, especially if you're saying these things on your turn. But bad spout of luck. So it's like, your deck is like 4 climaxes and 8 cards, and you whiff your brainstorm. Just move on from that bad piece of luck. You don't have to sit there and be like, how could I have possibly whiffed this brainstorm? It's so unlikely. You just, whenever you sit there and every time there's a bad stroke of luck, and you just like, even groaning and complaining, just like you refresh a climax, just ugh, and you like look down and you slam your hands on the table or whatever. That's taking time out of the round that you could have been using to just play the game. Again, at locals, bit of a different story. You're all there just having good, chill fun. Sometimes it's funny for those overreactions. But yeah, at a bigger level event, you should definitely not be doing any speaking or reacting unless it is absolutely necessary. Reading the opponent's cards. So you might think it's faster if you just ask your opponent, hey, what does that do? But that opens up way too much time for miscommunications or misinterpretations. Just read your opponent's cards. You will be able to read your opponent's card, have it in your head, everything that card does, and you will be able to move on and not have to ask about it again. It's happened too many times, especially in JP tournaments, where somebody will ask for what a card does. They will be told what it does in like shorthand, or they won't be told all of the effects because, it does this, and then this effect isn't relevant yet. But then it becomes relevant later, and you don't know about it because your opponent just didn't tell you everything. It will actually save you time in the long run if you just read your opponent's cards. Just take the half second, read it once, never have to read it again. Slightly related to it, take mental notes of when important cards enter or leave specific zones. That goes for your cards, and that also goes for your opponent's cards. So if you have really good counters against your opponent's deck, you should know what zone those are in. Or let's say you have some kind of a change at level 2. You shouldn't have to fan your waiting room out checking for, oh, hey, is my change target there? You should already know that your change target is there. If you have powerful one-ofs and they go to stock, if you cannot immediately pay them out, you should be making the note of, oh, hey, that card is there. That way you don't have to spend time later in the game either digging for a card that's not there or using an effect just to check your deck to see if it is in there. That also goes for keeping track of your opponent's stuff. So like if they have some kind of a silver bullet card against your deck, if you see that go to stock, you should make a note that that is there and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Or you should make a note that, oh, hey, I haven't seen this card all game. They're probably playing it. I should look out for it. You'll end up saving a lot of time. And this also goes for climaxes. This really, really, really goes for climaxes. I get a little annoyed every time I hear somebody ask me how many climaxes I refresh at every single refresh. So whenever your opponent mills a climax from like hitting a brainstorm, mills it off of some kind of a mill card, they cancel damage, anything like that, you should be keeping a tick in your head of just how many times a climax has entered or exited the waiting room. You should have a general idea of how much your opponent is refreshing even before they refresh. Yeah, that'll save you a whole lot of time not having to, in the 2, 3, sometimes even 4 times somebody refreshes in a game, asking, hey, how many climaxes? You don't believe them, you have to go and check yourself. You fan through their waiting room, you check, they shuffle, they hand it back to you, you shuffle, so on and so forth. Kind of related to that, remember your counts. So what I mean with this is most specifically your stock and deck size, or your opponent's stock and deck size. So if you're trying to mill yourself to a refresh and you count your deck and you have 20 cards and then you mill 10 cards, you shouldn't be having to check again to make sure you have 10 cards left in your deck. Sometimes you need to just confirm your count and you'll count your 20 cards and you'll be like, okay, I need to make sure that's 20. You make sure it's 20, you mill your 10, and then you don't have to count that you still have 10 there because 20 minus 10 is 10. There's no reason to fan out your deck again to count that again. Same thing goes for stock. So if your finisher requires you to have 9 stock to do triple of it, and you have that 9 stock, you shouldn't be having to count how much stock you have after every time you play the finisher. As far as sequencing goes, use random effects first, and I put a little asterisk there. So what I mean here is 9 times out of 10, any effect that you can resolve in a turn that is going to be left up to chance, so say a brainstorm or using a Rize to find a specific card, anything like that, you want to do that first, because what happens in that effect will determine how you play the rest of your turn. Going back to determining your actions before you actually take any, whenever you do that, you should be accounting for what outcomes that random effect could have. That way you know, hey, I'm going to use this random effect. If it does this, I'm going to do this. If it does that, I'm going to do this instead. And that'll just speed things along. That way you're not having to react to whatever the random effect was first. And if you have multiple random effects within a turn, so say you have like 2 brainstorms in the back row, you will know based on how many you have hit or have not hit what to do or what that means for your turn. So next, use gameplay shortcuts where possible and legal. So what this means is anything that you can do to just shorthand effects, especially searching effects, is going to cut down on time. So say you have like a bell level 1 from Dan Machi. The bell level 1 says whenever its climax is played into the climax zone, you search for a specific event. And then you shuffle, and then you can resolve the next one. So rather than resolving those one at a time, which will lead to you and your opponents both needing to shuffle your deck 3 separate times, just resolve them all at once. This goes for any time you use like a Ricky to grab a drop searcher. So like you can Ricky, grab your drop searcher, use the drop searcher, and you only have to shuffle once. Some shortcuts won't be legal, and avoid doing the illegal shortcuts because obviously you don't want to take illegal game actions. And sometimes your opponent just won't like it whenever you shortcut something. They might think you're trying to pull one over or something. Doesn't matter. If they don't like the shortcut, then so be it. Another good example of this is in Kanata Marine Hololive. You can just fan both of your Kanatas to change them both at the same time. Assuming your opponent is fine with this shortcut, you can play both changers, play your climax, put them both into the waiting room, put both of the level 3 Kanatas onto the field at the same time, heal 2 cards off at once. It saves so little time, but just little itty-bitty shortcuts like that over the course of an entire game can save entire minutes in the game itself. So moving on from here, we actually have stuff that's kind of in between the micro and macro. First of all, trust your intuition. If you've been practicing your deck, you know your deck, you made your deck, or you played enough with a deck that you copied, you should know just based off of instinct what you're trying to accomplish within a game. Extending off of that, this is partially counterintuitive, but the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. Hard decisions are often the ones that don't matter nearly as much. And what I mean by that is if you're sitting there trying to decide between one line of play or a completely other line of play that locks you out of going from the first line of play, but they both seem good, but you don't know which one is better. Obviously, you're not going to take a bad action. I hope anyway. So if you have the choice between 2 good decisions and you're just stuck on which one is ever so slightly better to take, just take one at random. Just leave it to chance, because the amount that one choice will be better over the other whenever the decision is that tough because of that small percentage, you're not even going to feel it. You're not going to feel that 0.5% difference in win rate ever. You will, however, feel a percent drop in win rate whenever you end up going to time, because you spent 5 minutes deciding, am I supposed to clock here or not? Moving on from that, we have research the meta for power cards. So what I mean by this is optimally you will know what your opponent's deck can do and what their power cards are. So that goes for things like really explosive finishers, fat walls that are really hard to scale, defensive counters. So like Hololive's tap counter, or formerly Mushoku's tap counter, Quint's neg soul counter, things of that nature. Cards that whenever they are resolved change how the game is going to end up being played. A finisher will kill you, a defensive counter will let them live longer, maybe neg an attack from you, so on and so forth. Just knowing that those cards exist will allow you to make better decisions and more well-informed decisions throughout a game. And then you won't have to spend so much time thinking about what your opponent's game plan is. If you already know your opponent's playing a deck that aims to put fatties out at level 2 and then protect them behind a counter, you'll know to prepare for exactly that, rather than, are they going to keep trying to hit me? How good is their finisher? So on and so forth. And last but not least, I have play faster decks. And I leave a question mark here because this is very player dependent. There's not a lot of deck archetypes in Weiss, but it would be disingenuous to suggest that there aren't any. If you find yourself going into time, if you think you're really good at playing to your outs, playing quickly, but you still find yourself going to time, it might just be because of your deck choice. So I know some decks like Hololive Kanata Marine will regularly try to slow the game down at level 2 by playing its tap counter over and over again, presenting fat walls for your opponent to deal with, stuff like that. If you find yourself going to time with these defensive decks, you might just want to look at a deck that is more suited to closing the game faster. And it's not meant to say that these decks are not the best deck. It's just to say that we only have a limited amount of time in every single round of a tournament. If a game takes longer than that time in order to finish, when played optimally, it's probably not actually a good pick for that event. So that is all I have. If you believe that I have forgotten anything, please comment below. I would love to talk about this. This is a very important topic to me, as I spend a lot of time thinking about how I can be a better player and how I can get better testing, and what that usually translates to is how can I get more test games in. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. I post funny memes sometimes. I love talking about this card game on Twitter, and I post anime pics sometimes. And then here we have the server link to the unofficial Weiss Schwarz competitive server here. You can just copy that link into Discord. A lot of good talk goes there. That's where I hang out most of the day. And yeah, feel free to tell me how wrong I am about all of this stuff down in the comments. Bye.